Eleanor Vance was a keeper of silence, a guardian of hushed whispers and forgotten secrets. As the head librarian and archivist for the town of Havenwood, her domain was a world of brittle paper, fading ink, and the faint, sweet smell of aged books. She was a small, unassuming woman with hands that moved with the practiced grace of a surgeon and eyes that held the collective memory of a century. She knew the town's official history by heart, the brave founders, the prosperous textile mills, the distinguished families whose names were etched on plaques and carved into monuments. But her true passion lay in the hidden history, the stories that had been deliberately left out. Her quest began, as so many things do, with a single, misplaced item. While reorganizing a dusty corner of the archives, a section rarely touched by human hands, she found an old, unassuming wooden box. It was tucked away behind a stack of forgotten yearbooks, its surface coated in a fine layer of dust. The box had no label, no name, no indication of its contents. When she opened it, she found a treasure trove, a series of leather-bound journals, a collection of letters tied with a frayed ribbon, and a handful of daguerreotypes, their subjects, staring out from the past with solemn, unblinking gazes. The journals belonged to a woman named Sarah Miller. Eleanor had seen her name in the margins of a few old records, a small donation to the library, a signature on a petition for women's voting rights, but she was a ghost in the official history, a footnote at best. As Eleanor began to read, a new Havenwood came to life. Sarah Miller wasn't a footnote. She was a force of nature. Her first journal entry, written in a clear, precise hand, spoke of her disillusionment with the town's founders. "They speak of founding a virtuous community," Sarah had written, "but their virtue is built upon the backs of others." Eleanor spent the next several months in a state of quiet obsession. She would arrive at the library before the sun, coffee in hand, and descend into the archives, the journals her only company. Sarah's story unfolded like a tapestry, rich with detail and shocking revelations. She was a suffragist, a fiery abolitionist, and a relentless advocate for the town's burgeoning labor movement. She spoke of her meetings with other activists, of the hushed, secret conversations in her parlor, and of the profound loneliness that came with her work. She was a warrior, fighting a silent war for justice in a town that prided itself on its serene, well-ordered facade. The journals also held a darker, more dangerous secret. Sarah had been a vital part of the Underground Railroad, using her home as a safe house for those fleeing bondage. She wrote of the constant fear, the coded messages, and the profound relief of seeing a family find freedom. But the most damning revelations were tied to the town's founding family, the Whitmores, according to the official history, were pillars of the community, philanthropic titans who had built the town's textile mills from the ground up. Sarah's journals, however, painted a different picture. She wrote of the Whitmores' avarice, their ruthless land grabs, and their brutal suppression of labor movements. More shockingly, she detailed their use of what she called postbellum slavery, a system in which they would employ newly freed African American men and women, only to trap them in cycles of debt and forced labor, a system that was, in all but name, indistinguishable from bondage. Sarah's records were meticulous, a damning account of dates, names, and specific incidents of violence and exploitation. She had been secretly funding and writing for a small, subversive newspaper that aimed to expose the Whitmores, only for it to be shut down through their political influence. Eleanor understood now why Sarah's story had been erased. It wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate act of historical violence, a systematic campaign to sanitize the past and protect the reputations of the town's most powerful families. The Whitmores, still a dominant force in Havenwood, had spent generations burying Sarah's story, a story that revealed their family's legacy as one built on exploitation and deceit. The very library she worked in, a supposed bastion of knowledge, had been complicit in the cover-up. The archives, the official town history, it was all a carefully constructed lie. Eleanor felt a deep, profound sense of responsibility. Sarah Miller had kept her secrets safe for over a century, waiting for someone to find them. Eleanor knew she couldn't keep this knowledge to herself. She had to bring it to light, to give Sarah's story the voice it had been denied for so long. She began to meticulously digitize the journals, creating encrypted backups and making copies of every single page. She knew that the moment she spoke, she would become a target. The Whitmores, a name now synonymous with the rival organization from a history she had only just discovered, would not let her get away with this. She had to be prepared for the fight of her life. The opportunity came in the form of a town hall meeting. The Whitmore family, led by the impeccably dressed and perpetually condescending Mr. Sterling Whitmore, had organized it under the guise of modernizing the town's institutions. Their true target, Eleanor knew, was the library. Sterling had long seen the archives as a liability, a place where inconvenient truths might one day come to light. He planned to propose a vote to cut the library's budget, claiming it was a relic of the past that needed to be repurposed. It was a thinly veiled attempt to gut the institution and seize control of its records. Eleanor, trembling with a mix of fear and righteous fury, decided this was her moment. She wouldn't just defend the library. She would expose the reason why it was being attacked in the first place. She prepared a presentation, a meticulous, well-researched account of Sarah Miller's life, using the journals as her primary source. She compiled a narrative that connected Sarah's work to the present day, using the Whitmores' own words and actions against them. She would not just tell a story, she would show them the truth. The town hall meeting was packed. The local press was there, the mayor, the city council, and a large contingent of curious and concerned citizens. The air was thick with tension. Sterling Whitmore, a man whose public persona was one of effortless charm and magnanimous philanthropy, began the proceedings. He spoke of the need to move forward, of the library as a charming but outdated concept, and of the need to invest in new forward-thinking initiatives. He spoke with the practiced ease of a man who had never been challenged. Then, it was Eleanor's turn. She walked to the podium, a small, solitary figure, in front of the large, imposing backdrop of the town's official seal. She looked out at the faces in the crowd, the skeptical, the curious, the concerned. She began not with the defense of the library, but with a question. "We are here to talk about history," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her nervousness. "But whose history are we talking about? The history we've been told, or the history that was buried?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sterling Whitmore, from his seat in the front row, leaned forward, a look of impatience on his face. "Ms. Vance, We are here to discuss the future, not to rehash the past. The past is not something you rehash, Mr. Whitmore, Eleanor said, looking him directly in the eye. It is a foundation, and if that foundation is built on lies, it will one day crumble. She began to speak of Sarah Miller. She described her as a pillar of the community, a suffragist and abolitionist who had dedicated her life to justice. She spoke of her work with the Underground Railroad, her quiet acts of defiance, and her profound love for her town. As she spoke, she projected images onto a large screen behind her. The elegant script of Sarah's journals, the old daguerreotypes of the people Sarah had helped, the faded, meticulously drawn maps of the escape routes. The crowd watched, mesmerized. This was a story they had never heard, a narrative that felt so much more alive than the dry, sanitized version they had been fed for generations. Then, she dropped the bombshell. She projected a specific page from Sarah's journal onto the screen. A page that detailed a conversation between Sarah and an unnamed man, one of the Whitmore ancestors. The entry spoke of the Whitmore family's textile mill, its brutal working conditions, and a system of forced labor that the Whitmores had used to expand their empire. Eleanor, her voice unwavering, read from the entry, letting Sarah's own words speak for her. The silence in the room was absolute. Sterling Whitmore's face, which had been a mask of smug amusement, went slack, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He had clearly underestimated Eleanor. She then projected an old, dusty legal document, a bill of sale from the mid-19th century, with the Whitmore family seal on it. The document was a contract to a group of recently freed African American men and women. The contract, a testament to the Whitmores' postbellum slavery, was a work of legal fiction. It promised them freedom and a fresh start, but it locked them into a system of debt and servitude that was, in all but name, slavery. The Whitmores' philanthropic legacy, their wealth, their power, wit, was all built on a foundation of exploitation and deceit. The truth, a long-buried ghost, had finally emerged. The crowd sat in stunned silence, their disbelief slowly giving way to a collective, dawning horror. They had spent their lives in a town that prided itself on its virtuous, upstanding history, only to discover that it was built on a lie. The historical society, the prominent family names, the very foundation of their community, was all a sham. Sterling Whitmore, his face a mask of cold fury, tried to speak, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed lie of his family's legacy was crumbling around him. Eleanor, her work done, stepped back from the podium, leaving the silence to do its work. The truth had left everyone speechless. In the days that followed, the town was a whirlwind of activity. The local news media, initially skeptical of Eleanor's claims, had a field day. They began to dig into their own archives, uncovering the sanitized stories, the buried truths, and the deliberate omissions. The Whitmore family, humiliated and exposed, went silent. Their public image was in tatters, their reputation ruined. The town, for its part, was in a state of collective shock and introspection. They had to confront the ugly truth about their history, to acknowledge the sacrifices and suffering that had been erased. The historical society, once a symbol of the town's elite, was dismantled. A new historical society was created, led by a group of citizens who were committed to telling the real story, Eleanor was given a seat on the board, her quiet determination now a source of public trust and admiration. Her first order of business was to create a new, accurate history of Havenwood, one that gave a voice to the voiceless, to the heroes like Sarah Miller whose stories had been buried for over a century. One afternoon, a few weeks after the town hall meeting, Eleanor found a small, unassuming headstone in a forgotten corner of the cemetery. It was cracked and weathered, the inscription barely legible. It read, "Sarah Miller, a quiet soul, now home." It was her original headstone, the one she had chosen for herself. A simple, unassuming marker that was, in its own way, a testament to her quiet defiance. The town, now in a state of collective atonement, decided to build a new monument to Sarah Miller. It was a beautiful, towering structure made of marble, a tribute to her legacy. The inscription was simple, but it spoke volumes. Sarah Miller, a suffragist, an abolitionist, a warrior for justice. Her story will never be erased again. Eleanor, now a local hero, a living embodiment of the truth, stood before the new monument, her hands clasped behind her back. She looked from the new, gleaming monument to the old, cracked headstone, and she smiled. The truth had not only emerged, it had spoken. And in doing so, it had finally, after a century of silence, set them all free. The immediate aftermath was a chaos of emotion. The hushed reverence of the town hall was replaced by a cacophony of raised voices, stunned whispers, and the furious click of camera shutters. Sterling Whitmore, his face a mask of cold, impotent rage, tried to regain control, but his authority had vanished. When he attempted to declare Eleanor's documents forgeries, his voice was a broken rasp. The crowd, once his loyal subjects, now looked upon him with a mix of betrayal and morbid curiosity. The man who had been the face of their town's nobility was revealed to be the heir to its greatest shame. He fled the stage, his family scrambling after him, leaving behind a legacy shattered beyond repair. The Whitmores became pariahs. They locked themselves away in their mansion, their public appearances a thing of the past. Their family foundation, a source of scholarships and community projects for decades, was shut down. Their names were quietly removed from the plaques on the library and the town hall, a symbolic act that a century of supposed benevolence could not erase a history of greed and cruelty. For the town of Havenwood, the truth was a painful but necessary cleansing. The shock gave way to a palpable sense of betrayal. People grappled with the cognitive dissonance of a history they cherished being revealed as a cruel fiction. The town's official narrative, so carefully cultivated, had been exposed as a whitewashed lie. Debates raged in coffee shops and on social media. The town divided between those who refused to believe and those who demanded accountability. But the evidence was undeniable. The Whitmores' secrets, now exposed, had poisoned the well of their reputation. The town library, once a quaint relic, became a hub of truth-seeking. People came not just to read, but to search for their own hidden histories. Eleanor, once an invisible guardian of the past, was now a reluctant public figure. She received praise, but also threats from those who resented the upheaval. The initial shock of her newfound fame gave way to a quiet resolve. She wasn't just an archivist anymore. She was a curator of truth. With a small group of passionate volunteers, she launched the Havenwood Truth Project, an initiative to gather oral histories and forgotten documents from the town's oldest families. They worked tirelessly, digitizing every scrap of paper, every journal, every letter they could find that told the real story of Havenwood. They discovered more hidden histories, the true stories of the labor movements, the women who had been instrumental in the town's early days but whose contributions had been erased, and the African American families who had built the town's infrastructure but were never credited as a symbol of this new commitment to truth. The town council, in a rare unanimous vote, approved a new monument for Sarah Miller. It would not be just for her, but for all the quiet souls whose stories had been erased. The monument was placed not in the old, prestigious part of the cemetery, but in a central park, a place where everyone could see it. It was made of local stone, rugged and unadorned, a testament to the unvarnished truth. The inscription was simple, but it spoke volumes to the unsung heroes of Havenwood. Their stories, once buried, now stand as our truest legacy. Below that, a list of names, compiled by Eleanor and her team, was carved into the stone, the names of the men and women who had been part of Sarah's underground network and the workers who had been exploited by the Whitmores. Months later, on the day the monument was unveiled, the entire town gathered. Eleanor, standing beside the mayor, looked out at the faces in the crowd. She saw a town that had finally, painfully, begun to heal. The shame was still there, a ghost in the air, but so was a sense of renewed purpose. The Whitmores were a footnote. Now, a cautionary tale. Sarah Miller, once a ghost, was now a legend. Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. She had not only honored Sarah's legacy, but had also given Havenwood a chance to build a better, more honest future. She knew the work wasn't over. There were more boxes to open, more stories to find. But for now, as she looked at the monument, she knew she had done her part. The truth had not only emerged and left everyone speechless, it had also become the cornerstone of a new, more just history.